Okay, I hope we can be heard. We are here at the IDM on-site session. I'm very happy to welcome Vera Strobachova-Budway today at our gender inequality and diversity management. So please let me shortly introduce our guest. Vera, you're a senior co-ordination advisor for gender issues at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And prior to that, you were officer at AIRS, are responsible for developing the first comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. You're US born, and you had a master's degree in political science and international relations from Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. But you're also still very active in Austria when it comes, for example, to your role as a founding member of the Austrian chapter of the International Women's Forum. So thanks again, Vera, for being here today with me.
Thank you for having me, Daniela.
Hello. So, Vera, I would love to ask you first about the current situation. So, as I understand, you're at the moment in Prague, but actually you're working in Vienna. How is the work environment, or has it been in the last weeks for you?
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, yeah, I'm based in Vienna at the OSCE, but my home, for personal reasons, is in Prague, so I used to commute every weekend. And on March 13th, actually, it was the last day before the shutdown, when they closed the borders. I managed to catch the last train back here to Prague before they closed the borders, and I have been working remotely since then. And of course, it's interesting. It has its challenges, but as I think many of us, we've gotten used to it quite quickly. And I've become very digitally agile in the past couple of weeks, getting used to doing a lot of webinars and everything going online, when before we were doing things more face-to-face. And actually at the OSCE, since the 13th of March, we've all been working remotely, at least those of us who are based in Vienna at the Secretariat. And it was interesting because before remote working, there were some that were skeptical about how effective we can be from working from home. And there were some that, of course, were questioning levels of productivity, you know, of working from home. But this experience of the past couple of weeks has proven the skeptics wrong. And what I've heard from many colleagues, not just in the OSCE, but just in general, that while working remotely, of course, is great, but we find ourselves sometimes working a lot more than we would when we were physically in the office. Because, of course, it's when sitting in front of the computer at your home, you're not actually getting up and going out somewhere, you're sitting. So I find myself in front of the computer all day long, sometimes till late at night. So then again, it's very important to take those breaks and to have a proper lunch break, and then to try to go outside and get some fresh air.
And actually, it's today is a different case, because we hope a lot of people are spending their lunchtime in front of screens, but and following us. But you can also do this on the balcony. The weather is okay, so. But as you said, it's very hard to kind of set a limit and to give yourself breaks and everything. But how is it? I mean, when you have families, when you have care work. Do you, in terms of work environment?
Yeah, very, very good question and very important question. At the OSCE, we helped and I helped develop a guidelines for managers on gender-sensitive managerial practices during remote working, because still, although, of course, this doesn't only affect women, but women are disproportionately affected by lockdown measures, especially working from home, because in most cases, it is still the women who have to bear the responsibility for caring for caring for children, for doing the shopping, preparing the meals, this what they say unpaid work that happens at home. And especially with the schools being closed, this has caused enormous stress in families, because of course all of a sudden now women have also become, or parents, we say substitute teachers, and having to work with their kids online, to adapt to ensuring that the children are keeping up with their online schoolwork and homework and everything that goes along with it. So what we've done is we've developed a set of guidelines for managers to simple things like, keeping in mind, ask your staff, ask your team, for instance, especially those that are taking care of children, when are good times to hold meetings? When are good times to organize staff meetings? Keeping and being mindful of things like lunch breaks, like break times, and planning around that. And I think it's very important to have this communication, and also to be aware of not to expect responses immediately to emails, and when do we expect for people to be online for instant messaging. I mean, it's just about being mindful and respectful of time, but then also realizing that people can pace the time when they can actually produce and deliver work. So the bottom line is focusing on managing by objectives, and not, this kind of, I call it default mode of being available from 9 to 5, every day. So I think that's especially for women and parents that are now at home with kids.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very challenging, not only for managers at the moment, but also for colleagues. Before you met in the workspace, in the office, and you could kind of maybe ignore as well the various let's say responsibilities, the private responsibilities that the colleague had, and at the moment this. You have to revive. So I think this is also kind of a learning effect in teams in general.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I hope that this will carry on and later on as well, if you return to the offices.
Yeah.
That the separation of the private life and the work life is kind of changing a bit.
I think this discussion on work-life balance has been ongoing for a long time now. And again, if there is a positive effect of the situation right now, is that, again, remote working is something that is doable and it works. And we can be, of course, this depends on your profession. I would like to stress, I'm now speaking from my experience working in my work environment at the OSCE, or thinking about my past working environment in more of a professional setting, where we can actually be very productive online, and we don't need to be physically present. This kind of more, I would say, old school thinking of this culture of being present and being seen, and there was this in the past where managers felt like, if I don't see you, you're not working. But now we realize that, we can be equally and maybe if not more productive in our work, and we do not have to be physically present to produce quality work and be effective.
I already mentioned prior to OSCE, you were working for Erste Group more than 12 years. So you were promoting diversity and gender equality for many, many years. A lot has changed also over the time, fortunately. Some hasn't changed so much, unfortunately, either. So
I think the main challenges I've seen from the very beginning up until now, and if I go back, 12 years ago, or more than over 12 years ago, when I started working for Erste Group in the Czech Republic, and at that time, in most companies did not have diversity managers or diversity programs. I mean, what we see today is they're really more commonplace. But to make I call the business case for it, because of course Erste Group is a bank, so I started working in the financial services sector, and to start with diversity and inclusion programs, you have to look at how will becoming a more diverse and inclusive company, organization, help us attract the best talent on one hand, and yet also, reach out to a more diverse client base, which it will impact the bottom line. So it was about drawing a connection between diversity and the bottom line, the business case for it, because at first people were asking that, we're a financial services provider, what does this have to do with our business? How does diversity actually make us become a more profitable organization and more effective? And I think that general trend, be it if you're working in a company in the private sector, in a certain industry, or right now in the context of the OSCE, one always has to look at how does diversity or gender equality really, impact our core business and what we do and make us more effective. And not only just to start, if you think about just gender diversity, if women make up 50% of the population, those are 50% of your clients, they're 50% of the electorate. These are people, so whether or not you're developing a product or service, you need to keep that perspective in mind. And the same thing is whether you are working on issues like democratization, like security, like the OSCE is looking at a comprehensive approach to it, the angle perspective into consideration. So the challenge always is to really be able to make that connection and make those arguments, why this is crucial, why we cannot have comprehensive security if half the population is not taken into account, and if you still have a lot of discrimination, if you have gender-based violence, if women are not equally represented in decision-making bodies, be it on corporate boards, be it in local municipal councils or parliaments, or anything. So this is I think a challenge, but at the same time an opportunity to reshape the conversation.
And by reshaping this conversation, I imagine that you need a lot of measurable factors that are convincing managers, especially in banks, especially in big corporations and organizations. I had experienced that, for example, in public relations, it's some values you cannot measure easily. These are long-term effects that are important. So how do you deal with that? How do you present it?
Yeah, well, I mean, facts, of course, are really important, and in finding the right kind of arguments and data. For instance, in the banking sector or in the private sector, there have been a lot of studies that have been done that actually draw a correlation between diversity in decision-making corporate boards and financial performance. I mean, McKinsey has done a lot of work on this, looking at Fortune 500 companies and measuring to what extent are women, or is there diversity on the boards, the decision-making bodies, and then looking at corporate performance. And there's a plethora of evidence that show that those companies that are more diverse have a higher, they have a higher return on equity, they have higher share price performance. This is all already more and more, you can find this data available. So it's all about presenting that data. It's also if I look at other areas, like for instance, there have been studies that have shown that when women are involved in peace negotiations, in peace treaties, negotiating peace treaties, that those treaties have a much higher chance of lasting longer, because it's again about the diversity. If you have people in negotiation teams that reflect the populations that are affected, there's a higher chance of those peace treaties and treaties lasting longer. So it's again, it's all about finding the right arguments and knowing who your audience is, to speak to that audience. And I think the arguments for gender diversity are clear, are really clear now. So
we have the arguments, we have the data. How to get the last steps done is the question.
That's always a challenge, is how to present that data, how to get others to listen and see. I think it's always good when you have concrete examples and you can really point to things that have worked. When you see, if you look at companies that are very successful in diversity management, and not just when talking about gender, but all aspects of diversity, if you can really point to, an increase that, if you are able to reach out to a female client base, you can, of course, increase your profitability, you can increase your sales. There have been a lot of examples already of, I know from the financial services sector that have successfully increased their female client base, and by successfully applying communication strategies, marketing kind of strategies, and outreach, as well as improving the type of services and
topics.
First, yes, of course, I experienced this a lot about this labeling, being called a feminist. I think that you're that you're against men, and I think that's the first kind of feeling is like, oh my God, the feminists are some kind of, crazy man haters, and that's a grave mis. And it could also be put in context. I know here in the working in a Czech business climate, sometimes I also observed that being labeled a feminist was really like something awful, and when you would talk to women in senior management positions, the reaction was, yes, I'm promoting women in senior management, but I'm not a feminist, So, and again, I think that stems from a lack of understanding what it means. So we need to get back. It affects all of us. So we definitely need men to become more vocal and be advocates for gender equality, because this is a win-win situation. Everyone wins. It's not that gains made by women, when women make gains, that men lose. It's not a zero-sum game here. So it's important to have male advocates, and we do that, and we've done that in the business, in the ESTE context. We had a kind of network of male ambassadors where we had senior male leaders in the company really advocate and become ambassadors for equality, for diversity and gender equality. And likewise, too, we have a network within the OSCE. It's called Men Engage. It's an internal network of male ambassadors that are advocates, and they advocate among their colleagues, and that also is extremely important to have our male colleagues argue why we all benefit from diversity.
That's great. Also, that they even dare to raise these topics. Sometimes it's hard because you also, as a man, you don't you easily jump into some uncomfortable discussions when you raise such questions.
Yeah. Well, one thing we always used to say to a lot of these men also have daughters. So this is also a starting point. When we talk about gender equality, you ask, what kind of future would you see for your daughter? I think most of these men would like to also see their daughters become successful and to have
thanks, Vera. I would also like to raise the question a bit on the effects of Corona crisis on gender inequality in a more the bigger picture. There are certain studies at the moment on domestic violence, for example, increasing during the crisis, during the lockdown measures. But also that the care work, as we already mentioned, increases and puts a lot of pressure on mostly women who are affected on that. So do you think this Corona crisis also endangers the already achieved equalities?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it does, and we've been seeing this every day as this crisis deepens and continues. You started by mentioning, I think, one of the most horrific side effects of this crisis, and that is the increase in domestic violence. Obviously, as lockdown measures have taken hold in all around the world, we have seen an increase in the rates of intimate partner violence and domestic violence, of course caused by not just the lockdown, but exacerbated also by the economic stress that has accompanied this, where both men and women have lost their jobs and livelihoods and incomes. As this kind of stress increases, rates of violence also have increased. And there has been a concern too, given that, just the lockdown, the social distancing measures, is that the availability of services, of shelters, that access to these services has been limited. There have been some good practices. Several countries have taken good measures immediately to ensure that access to services are still available, access to shelters, or expanding these hotlines that are available, these helplines, and also kind of coming up with creative ways to ensure that victims have direct access, because of course if you're locked down with a perpetrator, it's very difficult for you to make phone calls. So even things like using technology with apps, and kind of different apps to alert authorities when there is a situation where a woman or somebody finds themselves in danger. So these are all considerations. Also, there's a concern about the lack of funding, because right now funds are redirected to address the COVID crisis. So concerned that these social services or even NGOs that were providing a lot of support for victims of domestic violence, are facing issues of funding. So we want to raise awareness to that. And this also stresses the need to have more, we call gender disaggregated data when it comes to the crisis. We need to know, there has been information out there saying, for instance, that the death rates among men are higher than among women, so, but we really need to be tracking that in terms of gender, in terms of doing disaggregated sex and age disaggregated data of people contracting the viruses, of testing, who's getting tested more, what does this mean, not only the mortality rates, but looking at, and not only from gender and sex disaggregation, but looking at other factors such as ethnicity, race, social status, because if we can have this data now, it will allow us to have better responses or be prepared in the future, because of course we do need the responses to the crisis have to be gendered, and they also have to take into account, again, these various factors about age, gender, ethnicity, background, race.
Sorry to interrupt, which also brings us to the question of how many women are, or how diverse are these task forces that are at the moment. And then if you look at the conferences, I think there are no big exemptions, and women are not very often the actors in these groups.
Yeah, and those are the recommendations, of course, that we've been making. We've been saying it, especially at the OSCE, we've been looking at this very closely as well, to say that women need to be included in the decision making. They need to have a voice in these various bodies, in emergency responses. We need to have sex disaggregated data so we can have better gender responsive policies to this crisis as well as future crises. We need to be better prepared for this in the future. And I think by these lessons learned that we are seeing now will help us be better prepared in the future. And we are looking right now at kind of doing a type of analysis on the responses to the crises from a gendered lens, starting from the participation of women in these decision-making bodies to the types of measures that have been taken. Talked a bit about lockdown and the effect it can have on domestic violence, but also looking from the economic side. Now with these emergency packages, that are going to small businesses, that are going back into the economy, how are women being affected? There was an interesting article just now in the New York Times that just referred that we are not going through a recession, but a she session. That was referring to how women are now disproportionately also affected by job. Women are a lot of women make up very small business owners, as well as women are disproportionately represented in not only healthcare but other essential services like in supermarkets, working as cashiers, working really as care workers on the front lines. So
great, thanks a lot. So we have a very long agenda for the upcoming months and years on more research, more diversity in task force and in deciding bodies, and a lot of others demands that are important to not have this she session. If I said it right. I hope this will not be a term, because it will not be, not come to that, but anyway, it was very, very interesting to talk to you. Do you have any maybe available resources you would like to recommend if you're interested in this topic? Also on the OSCE.
There's actually now more and more being written about gender and COVID, and there's a plethora of resources out there. We have a blog on the OSCE website that not just on gender and COVID, on COVID in general. So you can follow us there, looking at different aspects of the crisis and how that affects our work. But on gender and COVID, there's a plethora of information out there on there's the European Institute of Gender Equality that is doing a lot of work in this area. UNFPA, lots of the UN agencies right now are really looking at the gender aspect. So you have a lot of analysis coming up. And what we're trying to do as well is put together a compilation of these resources to make them available sort of on one platform, so it's easy to access. But as we see again, as time goes on, we will see more an in-depth analysis on the situation. And to end again on a slightly more positive note, of course, it brings a lot of challenges, but we can learn a lot from this crisis. We should see it as an opportunity. I know that might sound a bit cliche, looking for an opportunity in every crisis, but I think it will give us an opportunity to learn some very valuable lessons and be better prepared for the next time around.
Okay, thank you so much, Vera, for this great talk, for your time, also for everyone who has followed us live on YouTube. Please let's like our videos, share it, so that we can also have a little contribution to this information, spread of this important topic. And yeah, I wish you all the best. I hope you can soon come to Austria again, and the borders will be open for everyone. And yeah, all the best from IDM in Vienna.
Thank you so much, and all the best to everyone watching from Prague.